Judge Diana Roberts checked her watch as she pulled out of the community center parking lot. The evening meeting had run longer than expected, but it had been worth it. She had spent the last 2 hours listening to local residents share their concerns about neighborhood safety and community policing. As one of the few black judges in the county, Diana made it a point to stay connected with the community she served. The drive home through Willowbrook Heights usually took 15 minutes. Diana knew this route well: tree-lined streets, well-maintained, sidewalks and houses that sold for more than most people made in 5 years. She had moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago, drawn by the good schools and quiet atmosphere. Some of her neighbors had been welcoming. Others had taken longer to warm up to her presence. Diana was thinking about tomorrow's court schedule when she noticed the police car in her rearview mirror. The cruiser had been following her for the past 3 blocks, staying exactly 2 car lengths behind. She checked her speedometer, 28 miles per hour in a 30 zone. Her hands were at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, just like her father had taught her 30 years ago. The red and blue light started flashing as she turned onto Maple Street, just 4 blocks from her house. Diana's heart sank. She pulled over carefully, making sure to use her turn signal and stop well away from traffic. She had been through this before, though not often. Each time felt like a test she had never asked to take. Diana rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. The first officer approached her car with confident steps. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his 40s, with graying hair at his temples. His name tag read Morrison. The second officer, younger and slimmer, hung back near the patrol car. His name was Chen. License and registration, Morrison said without any greeting. His tone was flat and businesslike. "Of course, officer," Diana replied calmly. "May I ask why you stopped me?" Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your vehicle matches the description of a car involved in a theft report. License and registration, please." Diana felt a familiar chill. She knew no theft report existed. Her silver Honda was one of thousands just like it in the city. But she also knew that arguing would only make things worse. She reached slowly toward her purse on the passenger seat. "I'm reaching for my wallet," she announced clearly. "My license is inside." She handed over her driver's license and registration. Morrison barely glanced at them before looking back at her with suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "Is that necessary?" Diana asked. "I've complied with your request for identification." "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the car now." Diana took a deep breath. She was a sitting judge with 15 years on the bench. She had presided over thousands of cases and earned respect from lawyers across the county. But none of that seemed to matter right now. She opened the car door slowly and stepped onto the sidewalk. Morrison immediately moved closer, invading her personal space in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he demanded. "A community meeting at the Willowbrook Community Center," Diana answered truthfully. Morrison snorted. "Right. And what exactly were you doing there?" "I was participating in a discussion about neighborhood safety and police-community relations." "Is that so?" Morrison's voice dripped with skepticism. "You don't look like someone who lives around here." Diana felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "I live 4 blocks away on Oak Street. I've been a resident of this neighborhood for 3 years. Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably near the patrol car, but he didn't speak up. Diana noticed him checking his watch and looking around nervously. "What do you do for work?" Morrison continued his interrogation. "I'm a judge," Diana said simply. Morrison laughed out loud. It was a harsh, mocking sound that cut through the quiet evening air. "A judge? You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," Diana replied with dignity. "I serve on the County Superior Court." "Sure you do, lady," Morrison said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "And I'm the governor of California. You got any proof of this judge story?" Diana gestured toward her car. "My judicial identification is in my briefcase on the back seat. I'd be happy to show it to you." "Don't move," Morrison snapped. "Keep your hands where I can see them." A few neighbors had begun to appear at their windows and front doors. Diana could feel their eyes on her, and she wondered what they were thinking. Did they recognize her as their neighbor? Or did they see her as Morrison apparently did? A suspicious intruder who didn't belong. "Look, officer," Diana said, trying one more time to reason with him. "If you'll just let me show you my judicial ID, this whole misunderstanding can be cleared up in 30 seconds. Misunderstanding? Morrison stepped even closer. "The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you can talk your way out of this with some fantasy story about being a judge." Diana realized that nothing she said was going to change Morrison's mind. He had decided who she was and what she represented before he had even gotten out of his patrol car. Her actual identity, her accomplishments, her position in the community, none of it mattered. "I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back," Morrison ordered. "For what?" Diana asked, her composure finally beginning to crack. "What crime am I being arrested for?" "Suspicious behavior, failure to comply with a lawful order, and we'll see what else once we search your vehicle." Diana looked over at Officer Chen, hoping for some sign of reason or intervention. The younger officer looked troubled, but he remained silent. She could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, but he wasn't willing to challenge his senior partner. "This is wrong," Diana said as Morrison reached for his handcuffs. "I'm telling you the truth about who I am. I'm Judge Diana Roberts of the County Superior Court. Call the courthouse, check your records, verify my identity." "Save it for someone who's buying what you're selling," Morrison replied as he grabbed her arm and spun her around. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Diana's wrists. She had sent countless people to jail over the years, but she had never felt handcuffs on her own wrists before. The sensation was humiliating and dehumanizing in a way that courtroom descriptions had never captured. More neighbors had gathered now, some standing on their porches, others peering through curtains. Diana wondered if any of them would speak up on her behalf. She had attended neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. She had waved to these people from her front yard and exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store. But as Morrison led her toward the patrol car, none of them said a word. The holding cell at the Willowbrook police station was small and cold. Diana sat on the hard metal bench, still wearing her professional blazer and pearl earrings from the community meeting. 3 hours had passed since her arrest, and she still couldn't quite believe what had happened. When they had finally processed her identification and realized their mistake, the desk sergeant's face had gone completely white. Within minutes, the watch commander had arrived, followed by the police chief himself. Everyone suddenly became very polite and very concerned about Judge Roberts' well-being. "Your Honor, this is obviously a terrible misunderstanding," Chief Peterson had said, wringing his hands nervously. "We're going to get this sorted out right away." But Diana knew the damage was already done. By now, half the neighborhood had seen her arrested in handcuffs. In a few hours, the story would spread through the courthouse, the local bar association, and probably the morning news. Diana's husband, Robert, arrived at the station 20 minutes after the police called him. She could see the mix of rage and concern on his face as he wrapped her in a tight hug. "Are you okay?" he whispered in her ear. "I'm fine," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The ride home was quiet. Robert's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, and Diana could feel his anger radiating through the car. They had been married for 18 years, and she knew he was struggling not to say something he might regret later. "Those officers should be fired," he finally said as they pulled into their driveway. "Maybe," Diana replied, "but that's not up to us." Robert turned to, "Look at her. How are you so calm about this? They treated you like a common criminal." Diana sighed. "Because getting angry won't change what happened. And because I know that if I react emotionally, people will use that against me, too." The next morning, Diana's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Judge Martinez, the chief judge of their court district. "Diana, I just heard what happened," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Carlos. Just tired." "Take the day off. Take the week if you need it. I'll have someone cover your calendar." Diana appreciated the offer, but she wasn't sure she wanted to hide at home. "I'll let you know." The second call was from her best friend and colleague, Judge Patricia Wilson. Girl, I cannot believe what I'm hearing, Patricia said. Please tell me you're calling a lawyer. I don't know yet, Diana admitted. I need time to think. By 8 a.m., Diana had received calls from 6 other judges, 4 attorneys, her sister in Portland, and 2 reporters from local news stations. She stopped answering the phone. Officer Chen couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the arrest, in his mind, thinking about all the moments when he could have spoken up but didn't. He had known something was wrong from the beginning. Judge Roberts had been calm, respectful, and truthful throughout the entire encounter. Morrison had been looking for a fight from the moment they pulled her over. Chen had been Morrison's partner for 8 months. The older officer had taken him under his wing when he graduated from the academy, teaching him about patrol procedures and street tactics. But over time, Chen had begun to notice patterns in Morrison's behavior that made him uncomfortable. Morrison seemed to target certain types of people: young black men, Hispanic families, anyone who looked like they didn't belong in the wealthier neighborhoods on their beat. He always found reasons to justify his actions after the fact, but Chen was starting to suspect those reasons were invented rather than genuine. The Judge Roberts incident had crossed a line that Chen couldn't ignore anymore. He spent the morning writing a detailed report about everything he had witnessed, including his observations about Morrison's behavior patterns over the past several months. Morrison, meanwhile, was telling a very different story to anyone who would listen. Over coffee at the police station, he complained to other officers about bleeding hearts and race baiters who were trying to make something out of nothing. The woman was acting suspicious, he insisted. How were we supposed to know she was really a judge? People lie to cops all the time. But some of the other officers weren't buying it. Detective Rodriguez had worked with Morrison for years and had seen this kind of thing before. You could have verified her story in 2 minutes, Rodriguez pointed out. Why didn't you just check her ID when she offered to show it to you? Morrison's face reddened. I don't have to explain my tactics to you. By noon, the story had hit social media. Someone in the neighborhood had recorded part of the arrest on their phone, and the video was spreading rapidly across Twitter and Facebook. The footage showed Diana in handcuffs maintaining her dignity, even as Morrison roughly guided her toward the patrol car. Local civil rights organizations were quick to respond. Reverend Johnson from the NAACP called a press conference for that afternoon. This incident represents everything that's wrong with policing in our community, he declared to the assembled reporters. Judge Roberts is a respected member of our community who has dedicated her life to justice and fairness. If this can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. The president of the local bar association issued a statement expressing support for Judge Roberts and calling for a thorough investigation. Law school professors began posting analyses on legal blogs about the broader implications of the incident. Diana spent the afternoon in her garden, trying to find some peace among her roses and tomato plants. But even there, she couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. She kept thinking about all the defendants who had appeared before her over the years, people who had told her about their own encounters with police, stories she had listened to with professional detachment. Now she understood something she had never fully grasped before. The humiliation of being handcuffed and searched wasn't just about the physical discomfort. It was about being stripped of your basic human dignity, reduced to a stereotype, treated as guilty until proven innocent. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Kelly, who was away at college. Mom, I saw the news. Are you okay? Should I come home? Diana typed back quickly. I'm fine, sweetheart. Stay focused on your studies. We'll talk this weekend. But she wasn't fine, and she knew it. The incident had shaken something fundamental in her understanding of her place in the world. For 15 years, she had worn the black robe of judicial authority with pride and confidence. She had believed that her position and accomplishments had earned her a certain level of respect and protection. Last night had proven how fragile that protection really was. Robert found her in the garden as the sun was setting. He sat down on the bench beside her, not saying anything at first. The chief called, he finally said. Chief Peterson. He wants to meet with you tomorrow to apologize. Personally, Diana pulled a weed from between her roses. What's the point? The damage is done. Maybe. But people are watching how this gets handled. Other people who might find themselves in the same situation someday. Diana looked at her husband. You think I should pursue this? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think you have an opportunity here to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. As darkness fell over their neighborhood, Diana could see lights coming on in the houses around them. She wondered what her neighbors were thinking about what they had witnessed. Would they see her differently now? Would they remember the arrest every time they saw her walking her dog or picking up her mail? One thing was certain. Everything had changed. The question now was what she was going to do about it. Internal Affairs Sergeant Linda Kowalski had seen a lot of police misconduct cases in her 12 years investigating officer behavior. But the Judge Roberts case was different. When a sitting judge gets arrested in her own neighborhood for allegedly matching a theft report that never existed, everyone from the mayor to the state attorney general starts paying attention. Kowalski spread the evidence across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. Body camera footage from both officers, dispatch records, the original police report, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen the arrest. The picture they painted wasn't pretty. The body camera footage was particularly damaging for Officer Morrison. The video clearly showed Judge Roberts being respectful and cooperative throughout the encounter. When Morrison claimed she was acting suspicious, the footage showed a woman calmly answering questions and offering to provide identification. When he said she resisted compliance, the video showed her moving slowly and announcing her actions to avoid any misunderstandings. Most damning of all, the dispatch record showed that no theft report had been filed that evening matching Judge Roberts' vehicle or any similar description. Morrison had either made an honest mistake or fabricated the justification for the stop entirely. Kowalski called Morrison into her office first. The veteran officer sat across from her desk with his arms crossed, his jaw set in a defiant line. "Walk me through the stop," she said simply. Morrison launched into his version of events. According to him, Judge Roberts had been driving erratically through the neighborhood. Her vehicle matched a bolo alert he thought he remembered from the morning briefing. When he approached her car, she was nervous and evasive, refusing to make eye contact. She claimed to be a judge, Morrison said with a snort. "You hear that? Kind of thing all the time. People think if they make up some important job, you'll let them off the hook." Kowalski made notes as he spoke. "Officer Morrison, I've reviewed the dispatch logs from that day. There was no bolo alert for a silver Honda or any similar vehicle. There were no theft reports matching that description." Morrison shifted in his chair. "Maybe I was thinking of something from the day before, or the week before. You handle a lot of calls. Sometimes they run together. The footage shows Judge Roberts offering to show you identification, to prove she was really a judge. Why didn't you let her? Because suspects will say anything to avoid arrest. They'll show you fake IDs, made-up business cards, whatever they think will work. I've seen it all." Kowalski leaned back in her chair. "But you never actually looked at her driver's license carefully enough to see her name, did you? Diana Roberts. A simple computer check would have confirmed her identity in 30 seconds. Morrison's face reddened. "Look, I made a judgment call, based on my experience and training. If that woman really is a judge, then she should understand that police work isn't perfect. We're out there making split-second decisions with incomplete information. The interview with Officer Chen went very differently. The younger officer looked exhausted and stressed when he entered Kowalski's office. His uniform was wrinkled, and she could see dark circles under his eyes. "I know why I'm here," Chen said before she could ask her first question. "I should have spoken up. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't do anything about it." Kowalski studied him carefully. "Tell me what you saw." Chen took a deep breath and began describing the arrest from his perspective. He explained how Morrison had become fixated on Judge Roberts from the moment they spotted her car. There had been no radio call about a theft, no bolo alert, no legitimate reason for the stop. Morrison said she looked like she didn't belong in the neighborhood, Chen admitted. That's what he always says when he wants to stop someone in the nice areas. I should have questioned him then, but I was afraid of causing problems with my partner. Has this happened before? Chen nodded reluctantly. Morrison targets certain people. He says it's good police work, stopping suspicious characters before they can commit crimes, but I'm starting to think it's something else. Kowalski made careful notes. Why didn't you intervene during the Roberts arrest? I wanted to, Chen said quietly. When she offered to show her judicial ID, I could see in her eyes that she was telling the truth. But Morrison is a senior officer with 15 years on the force. I'm still in my first year. I was afraid that if I challenged him, it would ruin my career. The investigation expanded beyond just the Roberts incident. Kowalski began reviewing Morrison's arrest records and complaint histo. What she found was a clear pattern of stops that disproportionately targeted Black and Hispanic residents, particularly in wealthier neighborhoods. Over the past 2 years, Morrison had made 43 traffic stops that resulted in searches. 37 of those stops involved people of color. Only 6 had resulted in actual arrests or citations for legitimate violations. The rest had been released without charges after lengthy detentions and invasive searches. Kowalski also discovered that 4 formal complaints had been filed against Morrison in the past 18 months. All 4 complainants were people of color, who claimed they had been stopped without justification and treated with unnecessary aggression. Each complaint had been investigated and dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Meanwhile, Judge Roberts was struggling with her own decision about how to respond to the incident. The arrest had been covered extensively in local media, and she was receiving calls from civil rights attorneys offering to represent her in a lawsuit against the police department. She met with her longtime friend and mentor, retired Judge Franklin Davis, at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Judge Davis had been one of the first Black judges appointed to the County Superior Court, and Diana had looked up to him throughout her career. The lawyers are telling me I have a strong case for civil rights violations, Diana said, stirring, her coffee absently. They think I could win significant damages. Judge Davis nodded thoughtfully. You probably could. The question is whether that's what you want to accomplish. What do you mean? A lawsuit would be about compensation for what happened to you. But is that going to change anything for the next person Morrison pulls over? Or the person after that? Diana considered his words. So, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you think about what kind of change you want to see. Do you want Morrison to pay you money? Or do you want Morrison to never do this to anyone else again? The conversation stayed with Diana for days. She realized that while the arrest had been personally humiliating and traumatic, her real concern was about systemic change. How many other people had Morrison targeted over the years? How many complaints had been brushed aside because the victims didn't have her status and connections? She made her decision during a long walk through her neighborhood. Instead of filing a civil lawsuit, she would cooperate fully with the internal affairs investigation and push for criminal charges if the evidence supported them. She would use her platform as a respected judge to advocate for police reform and accountability. But first, she needed to know everything about Morrison's history and the department's handling of previous complaints. If there was a pattern of misconduct that had been ignored or covered up, that needed to be exposed and addressed. Diana called Sergeant Kowalski and requested a meeting. When they sat down in the IA office the next day, Diana didn't come as a victim seeking compensation. She came as a judge seeking justice. I want to know about every complaint that's ever been filed against Officer Morrison, she said, and I want to know why none of them resulted in discipline or retraining. Kowalski hesitated. Your Honor, I can't share details about other ongoing investigations. Then maybe it's time someone filed a formal complaint about how this department handles complaints, Diana replied calmly. Because if Morrison has been allowed to continue this pattern of behavior without consequences, then my arrest wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system that doesn't hold officers accountable for their actions. The investigation was about to get a lot more complicated. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez stared at the case file on her desk with growing concern. The internal affairs investigation had uncovered far more than just one bad arrest. Officer Morrison's pattern of misconduct stretched back years, and the department's failure to address previous complaints raised serious questions about systemic problems in the police force. Martinez had been district attorney for 6 years, and she had always tried to maintain a good working relationship with local law enforcement. But this case was different. When a respected judge gets arrested in her own neighborhood based on fabricated evidence, and when that arrest appears to be part of a larger pattern of racial profiling, criminal charges become not just appropriate, but necessary. The evidence was overwhelming. Morrison had lied about the theft report that supposedly justified the stop. Body camera footage contradicted his claims about Judge Roberts' behavior. And the investigation had revealed at least 12 other questionable arrests over the past 3 years, all following similar patterns. Martinez called a meeting with her senior prosecutors to discuss the case. The conference room fell silent as she laid out the evidence and the potential charges. "We could charge Morrison with false imprisonment, filing a false police report and civil rights violations under color of authority," she explained. Officer Chen presents a more complex situation. He didn't initiate the stop or make the false statements, but he failed to intervene when he knew his partner was acting improperly. Senior Prosecutor David Kim raised his hand. "What about the union? They're going to fight this hard." Martinez nodded grimly. The police union had already issued a statement defending both officers and criticizing the investigation as a politically motivated witch hunt. Union President Tom Bradley had appeared on local television, claiming that Morrison and Chen were being scapegoated to appease community activists. "The union can say whatever they want," Martinez replied. "Our job is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And the evidence clearly shows that crimes were committed." The next challenge was political. Mayor Williams had been trying to balance community demands for accountability with pressure from the police department to stand by their officers. When Martinez called to inform him about the pending charges, the conversation didn't go well. "Rebecca, you need to think carefully about this," the mayor said. "These officers have families, they have years of service to the community. One mistake shouldn't destroy their careers." "Mr. Mayor, this wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern of misconduct that the department failed to address. If we don't hold officers accountable when they violate people's rights, we're essentially giving them permission to continue doing it." Martinez could hear the mayor sighing on the other end of the line. "What about the Roberts woman? Is she pushing for prosecution?" "Judge Roberts has been cooperative with the investigation, but she's not driving this decision. We don't prosecute crimes based on whether victims want us to. We prosecute based on evidence and the law." Judge Roberts, meanwhile, was dealing with her own challenges. The arrest had thrust her into an unwanted spotlight, and she was struggling to balance her role as a victim with her responsibilities as a sitting judge. Some colleagues had suggested she take extended leave until the situation resolved itself. Others argued that stepping back would send the wrong message. She decided to return to work, but recused herself from any cases involving the police department. Walking into the courthouse that first morning back felt like running a gauntlet. Reporters were camped outside, and everyone she passed in the hallway seemed to be staring at her. Her first case that day was a simple property dispute, but even that felt different now. She found herself thinking about every defendant who appeared before her, wondering what their interactions with police had been like, and whether she had been too quick to accept officer testimony in previous cases. During lunch break, Judge Roberts met with Chief Judge Martinez in his chambers. "How are you holding up?" he asked with genuine concern. "It's complicated," she admitted. "Part of me just wants this whole thing to go away, but another part of me knows that if I don't speak out, nothing will change." "You don't owe anyone anything," the Chief Judge reminded her. "You're the victim here, not an activist. But maybe being a victim gives me a responsibility to speak for other victims who don't have my platform." 3 weeks after the arrest, District Attorney Martinez announced the charges at a packed press conference. Morrison would face felony, charges of false imprisonment and civil rights violations, plus a misdemeanor charge for filing a false police report. Chen would be charged with conspiracy and failure to perform his duty as a peace officer. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Civil rights groups praised the decision as a step toward accountability, while police union representatives denounced it as an attack on law enforcement. Some officers called in sick to protest the charges, though the police chief ordered them Back to work under threat of discipline, Morrison's attorney, Daniel Foster, held his own press conference that afternoon. He portrayed his client as a dedicated officer who had made an honest mistake in a split-second situation. "Officer Morrison has served this community faithfully for 15 years, Foster declared. "He has put his life on the line countless times to protect the citizens of this city. Now he's being crucified because he made one error in judgment during a routine traffic stop." But Sergeant Kowalski's investigation had revealed that it wasn't one error in judgment. Morrison's arrest reports showed a clear pattern of targeting. Minority residents with aggressive tactics and questionable justifications. Several of his previous arrestees had filed complaints that were dismissed without proper investigation. Chen's situation was more sympathetic. His attorney argued that the young officer had been following the lead of his senior partner and didn't have the authority or experience to intervene. Chen himself was cooperating with prosecutors and had expressed genuine remorse for his failure to speak up. The charges sent shockwaves through the police department. Officers who had worked with Morrison began to distance themselves from him, while others rallied to his defense. The department was split between those who saw the charges as necessary accountability and those who viewed them as a betrayal of the thin blue line. Judge Roberts watched the press conference from her chambers, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of her was relieved that the system was working as it should, that evidence and law were taking precedence over institutional loyalty. But another part of her was saddened that it had taken her arrest to expose problems that had been ignored for years. Her phone rang almost immediately after the press conference ended. It was District Attorney Martinez. "I wanted you to hear this directly from me," Martinez said. "We're moving forward with prosecution. Both officers will be arraigned next week." "Thank you," Judge Roberts replied. "I know this wasn't an easy decision. Actually, it was easier than I expected. Once we looked at all the evidence, it was clear that crimes had been committed. The hard part will be proving it in court." Judge Roberts knew that the real test was still ahead. Getting charges filed was one thing. Getting convictions was another entirely. Police officers rarely faced criminal consequences for their actions, even when the evidence was strong. Juries often gave them the benefit of the doubt, accepting arguments about split-second decisions and the dangers of police work. But something felt different about this case. Maybe it was because the victim was a judge who commanded respect in the legal community. Maybe it was because the evidence was so clear and the pattern of misconduct so obvious. Or maybe it was because the community was finally ready to demand real accountability from those sworn to protect and serve. As Judge Roberts prepared to leave the courthouse that evening, she realized that her life had been permanently changed by that night 3 weeks ago. She could never again approach her job with the same assumptions about police testimony or the presumption of good faith by law enforcement officers. The question now was whether Officer Morrison and Chen would face real consequences for their actions or whether the system would find a way to protect them as it had so many times before. The courtroom assignment system was supposed to be random. When Judge Diana Roberts saw People vs. Morrison and Chen appear on her calendar, she had to read it twice to make sure she wasn't seeing things. Of all the judges in the county, the case had been assigned to her. Her first instinct was to recuse herself immediately. No reasonable person would expect her to preside over the trial of the officers who had arrested her. But as she researched the ethical guidelines and consulted with legal experts, a different picture emerged. The charges against Morrison and Chen weren't about her specifically. They were about criminal conduct, false imprisonment, filing false reports, and civil rights violations. The fact that she had been the victim didn't automatically disqualify her from hearing the case, especially since she wasn't seeking personal damages or compensation. Diana spent a sleepless night considering her options. She could step aside and let another judge handle the case, which would certainly be the safer choice. Or she could stay on the case and demonstrate that the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their position or authority. The next morning, she made her decision. She would remain on the case but would bend over backwards to ensure absolute fairness to both defendants. Every ruling would be meticulously researched and documented. She would give their attorneys every benefit of the doubt on procedural matters. while still holding them to the highest standards of evidence and legal argument. When court convened for the first pretrial hearing, the tension in the room was immediate and obvious. Morrison's attorney, Daniel Foster, was on his feet before Diana had even taken her seat. "Your Honor, my client moves for immediate recusal. It's impossible for you to be impartial in this case given your personal involvement in the alleged incident." Diana had expected this challenge and was prepared for it. "Mr. Foster, I've consulted extensively with judicial ethics experts about this matter. While I have the discretion to recuse myself, I'm not required to do so. The charges against your client concern criminal conduct, not civil damages related to my arrest. I'm confident in my ability to be fair and impartial." Foster pressed harder. "Your Honor, surely you must have feelings about what happened to you. How can you set those aside?" Diana looked directly at Morrison, who sat at the defense table avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Foster, every judge has personal experiences that could theoretically affect their judgment. I've been the victim of crimes before, but that hasn't prevented me from hearing criminal cases. I've been divorced, but I still hear family law matters. The question isn't whether I have personal knowledge of the events in question. It's whether I can apply the law fairly based on the evidence presented in court." The motion to recuse was denied, but Diana knew it would likely be appealed. For now, though, the case would proceed. Officer Chen's attorney had taken a very different approach from Morrison's. From the beginning, Chen had expressed remorse for his failure to intervene and had cooperated fully with the investigation. His lawyer negotiated a plea agreement in which Chen would testify truthfully about what he witnessed in exchange for reduced charges. When Chen took the stand during Morrison's trial, his testimony was devastating for his former partner. Speaking, in a quiet but clear voice, Chen described how Morrison had targeted Judge Roberts from the moment they spotted her car. He said she looked like she didn't belong in that neighborhood, Chen testified. There was no radio call about a theft, no bolo alert. Officer Morrison decided to stop her based on his own assumptions about who should and shouldn't be driving through that area. Morrison's attorney tried to attack Chen's credibility, suggesting that he was lying to save his own career. But Chen had written detailed reports immediately after the incident, and his testimony was consistent with the body camera footage. "Why didn't you speak up if you knew the stop was improper?" Foster asked during cross-examination. Chen looked down at his hands. "Because I was a rookie officer and Morrison was my training partner. I was afraid that if I challenged him it would hurt my career. I was wrong to stay silent, and I regret it every day." The prosecution's case was methodical and thorough. They presented the body camera footage, which clearly showed Judge Roberts being respectful and cooperative throughout the encounter. They called witnesses who testified about Morrison's pattern of targeting minority residents in affluent neighborhoods. They brought in experts who explained how the supposed theft report that justified the stop had never actually existed. Morrison himself took the stand in his own defense, maintaining that he had acted in good faith based on what he believed was accurate information. But under cross-examination, his story began to fall apart. "Officer Morrison, you testified that you thought Judge Roberts' vehicle matched a theft report from your morning briefing," Prosecutor Lisa Park said. "But we've examined all the reports from that day and no such theft was reported. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair. "Maybe I was thinking of a report from a different day. We handle a lot of calls. So you're saying you confused a theft report from a different day? Can you tell us which day that report was filed?" "I don't recall the specific date. In fact, Officer Morrison, we've examined theft reports for the entire month before Judge Roberts' arrest. There were no reports of stolen silver Honda sedans or any similar vehicles. Isn't it true that you fabricated this justification after the fact?" Morrison's face reddened. "I did not fabricate anything. I acted based on my training and experience." Judge Roberts listened to every word of testimony with careful attention, taking detailed notes and making sure she understood every legal nuance. When Morrison's attorney objected to questions or evidence, she ruled fairly based on established legal precedent. When the prosecution pushed too hard, she sustained defense objections and reminded them to stay within proper bounds. The hardest moment came when the prosecution played the body camera footage of her arrest. Sitting in her judge's robes, watching herself being handcuffed and searched on the courtroom's large monitor. Diana felt the same humiliation and anger she had experienced that night, but she forced herself to view the footage objectively, as evidence in a criminal case rather than a personal trauma. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed with reporters, community activists, and police officers. Morrison stood as the foreman read the verdict. On the charge of false imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of filing a false police report, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations under color of authority, we find the defendant guilty. Morrison's shoulders sagged as the guilty verdicts were read. His attorney immediately announced plans to appeal, but the message was clear. Police officers could be held accountable for their actions, even when their victims were members of the community they were supposed to protect. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Morrison's family and friends testified about his character and his years of service to the community. Community members spoke about the fear and mistrust his actions had created. Judge Roberts listened to all of it carefully before announcing her decision. "Officer Morrison, you took an oath to serve and protect the citizens of this community," she said, looking directly at him. "Instead, you used your authority to target and intimidate people based on your personal biases. You violated the civil rights of citizens you were sworn to protect, and then you lied about your actions to cover up your misconduct." She sentenced Morrison to 18 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service in the neighborhoods where he had targeted residents. She also ordered him to undergo bias training and prohibited him from working in law enforcement in any capacity. Officer Chen, who had cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty to reduced charges, received 6 months of probation and was required to complete bias training before returning to duty. The judge noted his cooperation and remorse while emphasizing that officers have a duty to speak up when they witness misconduct. As Diana left the courthouse that day, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but the broader problems in policing couldn't be solved by one trial. Morrison's conviction was important, but it was just the beginning of the work needed to rebuild trust between police and the communities they serve. The case had changed her, both as a judge and as a person. She would never again take for granted the protections that her position and status had provided, and she would never forget that justice delayed is justice denied, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been targeted by Morrison over the years and whose complaints had been ignored. In the end, the arrest that was meant to humiliate and silence her had instead become a catalyst for accountability and change. It wasn't the outcome Morrison had intended, but it was the one that justice demanded.